no doubt notice that the passage that he just read was the same one that we had last week. Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 through 10. And so we're going to be looking a little bit deeper into that today. I just want to give you a reminder, if you didn't hear last week's message, you can find that somewhere.
Not yet.
Not yet.
There were issues with
Someday, somehow, maybe. Okay. It should be available. We had the one from the week before uploaded on YouTube, so you should be able to find a link for that somewhere if you're seeing this later. It's on our church YouTube site. So we're talking about spiritual community, and today we're going to be talking about bearing burdens. And if you notice in this passage, it talks about bearing burdens. So, just a quick review from last week. You'll remember we had the pyramid that showed up there, and the bottom line of the pyramid, does anybody remember what that was? Anybody? We lost our webmaster here for a moment. Does anybody remember what the foundation level of the pyramid? Oh, we have a temporary webmaster that jumped to the before there. So, is anybody? I don't see anybody waving their hands excitedly.
Pointing out the sin of others.
Oh, so actually, I pointed out that that is not the foundation. That that's the last thing we should be doing. So we start with the foundation of the pyramid is having.
Oh, I thought you wanted the top of the pyramid.
No, I'm asking for the foundation. What's the foundation? What's the base that we start with? And oh, I see someone's waving a hand there. Does he have an answer? He doesn't have an. I bet he has an answer. Okay, Jessica had her hand up there.
I cheated. I looked at a screenshot of it.
Oh.
Spiritual mind.
Okay, that's all right. If you have a screenshot, that's good for you. We could put that pyramid back up on the screen if our technical people know how to do that, but maybe in a minute we'll show that. So yes, the baseline is having the spiritual mind, the spiritual mindset, that mind of Jesus that we are called to have, and that is when Jesus is living in us, and we are in. Oh, it's on the PowerPoint for today. Yeah. So that's the place to start. We have to have that spiritual mind. The next level up, now coming into the passage here in Galatians, is doing good. And we didn't talk at great length about that, but other than just to point out that this should kind of naturally flow from having a spiritual mind and loving others as we love ourselves. And in here it says that we should do good to all, especially those who are of the household of faith. And they pointed out that word household in the King James is a word that could just as well be translated family of faith, or the family of God. And so we should be doing good, and I even went so far as to say something scandalous, which was to quote from Hebrews, where it says that we should provoke one another to love and to good works. And so that's the basis here. And now going up to the mid-level on the pyramid there is bearing burdens. And so that's our focus for today, is bearing burdens. And here it says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Now, that's interesting. We pause to think about that for a moment. It's by bearing one another's burdens that we fulfill the law of Christ. Now, we didn't do an in-depth word study on this, but what is the law of Christ? If you were going to think of, right off the top of your head, what would be the law of Christ? What do you think? It's,
love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
it's going to be love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So Paul is saying that when we bear one another's burdens, we are doing that. We are loving people the way that Jesus has called us to do. Now, can we show that quote? There's one of my favorite books called The Ministry of Healing. Some of you are familiar with this book. And this is the very first paragraph from that book. And I can almost read it because it's covered up by the gallery there. So I'm going to read this quote. Hopefully you can see it on your screen. It says, "Our Lord Jesus Christ came to this world as the unwearied servant of man's necessity. He took our infirmities and bare our sicknesses, that he might minister to every need of humanity. The burden of sin, of disease and wretchedness and sin he came to remove. It was his mission to bring to men complete restoration. He came to give them health and peace and perfection of character." Notice here it talks about the burden. And so what is the burden that we bear? The burden of disease, the burden of wretchedness, and the burden of sin, among others. But those are probably the most significant burdens that we bear. So I want to look at two scriptures from the Old Testament just briefly, and then we're going to come into some sort of discussion of the practical implications of this idea. So if we go to Isaiah, we're going to find Isaiah 53 and Isaiah 58 both refer to bearing burdens. So starting in Isaiah chapter 53, most of you are familiar with this passage. You'll understand this is a passage of prophecy concerning the Messiah. And if we look at verse 4, what does it say? Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 4. "Surely he hath done what? Borne our griefs and carried our sorrows." Isn't that a description of Jesus bearing our burdens? Our griefs and our sorrows. What heavier burden could there be than grief and sorrow? If there is one, I don't know what it is. Jesus came to this earth to bear our burdens. Now, turn the page, 2 pages over in my Bible, Isaiah chapter 58, and if you look at verse 6, the Lord says, "Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke." So this is what God is calling us to do, to relieve people of the burdens that they carry. And so Paul says, bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And in fulfilling the law of Christ, we're simply imitating Christ. And that means, if it means anything, it means, that's what it means to be a Christian. If you call yourself a Christian, that means at its core that you are following Christ, that you're emulating Christ, and this is what he calls us to do. Bear one another's burdens. And so now what I want to do is a little exercise. And this is going to be kind of tricky because of the format that we have with our Zoom meeting, but we're going to do the best that we can, okay? We're going to put up the slide, the slide with the 4 different,
The next one.
that one, yeah, right there. Okay, so you see the slide, and those who have been following along the messages since last fall will recognize this. So this is simply a graphic representation of a human being. We have a physical body, we have emotions, we have thoughts, and we have a spiritual part to us. And of course, we understand that this is sort of, this is not really the way it is, or not compartmentalized that clearly, but it helps us to think of these sort of different realms of what it means to be a human being. So we have the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual. It's another way of putting that. And so what I'm going to challenge us to do for the next few minutes is to think about how can we do this? And what would it mean, or what would it look like to bear one another's burdens in each of these four realms? Okay? And so I'm going to be calling on you to think about either, so for each one of these I want at least one Bible example. Okay? One Bible example of bearing this type of burden, and I want to have a practical real life example from right now, like a way that we could do this. This might be maybe a burden that you have that someone could meet. You could share how could someone help you, or maybe that would be too personal, so maybe you want to make it more theoretical, like, hey, if this were to happen, someone could help someone in this way, or bear a burden in this way. Okay? So is everybody kind of clear on what we're doing? Can we put back up the gallery so I can see the people now, please? So the first one is going to be in the physical realm. Okay, so what are some ways practically, physically, that you recall from stories in the Bible where people actually physically helped each other? And what are some ways that we can do this now in real life? Okay? So I have lots more thoughts on this, but I want to hear from you guys. What's a Bible story that you recall where someone actually physically helped someone? So I have Nancy is waving her hand. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thinking about the Good Samaritan,
Oh, yes.
because I saw a guy lying in the road and several other people passed by and didn't help.
Right. And
Yeah.
And Jesus said to the Pharisees and the scribes, he said, woe to you who burden people and you won't lift one of your fingers to help with the burden. And then he told this story of the Pharisees and the scribe, the priest and the Levite that went by, but the Samaritan actually physically stopped and put his life in jeopardy to physically minister to someone else, to clean him up, to tend to his wounds, to give him a ride, and help him with a place to stay. Good example. Is there another? Jessica has her hand up. Okay, go ahead.
Mephibosheth. David and Mephibosheth.
David, okay, David and Mephibosheth, yes. So he was injured, and David ended up helping him in a bunch of different ways. So, yes, indeed. So we could probably think of a lot of examples. I'll tell you one that I thought of, and then I want to go to some practical application. I remembered when the children of Israel went into the Promised Land. Y'all remember that story? And there were 2 tribes that had their inheritance on this side of Jordan, and the other 10 on the other side. You remember what happened? The 2 tribes, they said, okay, we'll leave our women and children and cattle here, and we will go and fight with you in the battle until you're established in your land. And so they helped to bear they could have just said, hey, we have our part. You guys, good luck with your fight. But no, they said, we're going to go with you to the battle. And so they helped to bear the burden of conquering the land and helping their brothers to have a home. All right, so what about practical application? How can we bear one another's burdens in a practical way in the physical or the material world?
That's all described in Isaiah 58, 6 on. Verse 6 and on, it shows the practical side of loosing the bands and
All right.
brokenness and undoing heavy burdens.
Yep. Anyone else? What's a specific thing? Vicky, Lewis, go ahead.
Well, we all could have helped Bob and Jill if they would have let us know they needed help
Oh my.
with their beam.
Yes.
social distancing.
I
You
think
didn't even ask me.
maybe Bob was trying to get the beam out of his own eye. Hey, no. That's the message. That's going to be in a couple of weeks. That message isn't for later. But yes. So this is an interesting thing. Yes. So we can physically help each other with projects that need to be done. Right? I was thinking of Bob this morning as I was reviewing this in my own mind. I have helped to bear some of Bob's burdens at least twice. Like a whole truckload of them. Right?
But that's because I'm a very needy person.
Yes, well, okay. But like literally we came and helped you bear the burdens from the truck into the house and then from the house and it would, yeah. So that's, right? We helped them move. Yes, Bob, go ahead.
3 times, he says.
What was that?
3 times.
I said that you helped with the burdens 3 times because
Yeah,
first we moved into the house and it burned, and then we moved into Judith's, and
right.
then we moved up into our place.
Yeah, I lost track. Some people have so many burdens, it's hard to keep track.
I was thinking of the example of what Templeton did with their medical and dental clinics, and I don't know if many of you have seen the I think it was on Facebook where this guy shows up with the guy that had the root canal that needed to happen and no money for it, and all of a sudden the guy starts going to church, and I'm thinking, wow, they've got it down. And then I'm thinking, why we had talked about doing something that here? Why don't we? That would just be awesome.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So there's those big group things, but then we also have stuff like right within our own church, where the passage here is talking about within the household of faith. So some of us have projects that need to be done at our house. Some of us have. What was that, Samuel?
Really?
Really, yes. Some of us have physical ailments that we need help doing certain things. And so to bear one another's burdens means that you show up and help with those things in a very real and concrete way. Sometimes it might be stacking firewood. Sometimes it might be digging a ditch. Sometimes it might be, I don't know. There's lots of things. But of course, I'm sure Bob doesn't mind if I pick on him just a little bit because it's Bob. But thank you, Bob, for volunteering. I love Uncle Bob, okay? You know that. You know I love you, Bob. But Vicky has a good point about we have to let people know what's going on with us that we need help with. Because sometimes we're tempted to just sit at home with our own problems and then wonder why nobody's helping us when nobody knows that we have the problem that we need help with. And I want to say I believe that's why we start with doing good and just being involved in people's lives. So obviously the last month we were under some sort of government restrictions. So, but what if more of us had been over to Bob's house more frequently, hanging out and like sitting in the hot tub and looking at this thing that was about to fall down? We would have known that there was a problem, and we could have volunteered to help him. Right, Bob? Yeah, but I haven't been hanging out in your backyard lately, so I didn't even know that. So it's maybe part of me needing to go down to that lower level and say, hey, I need to spend more time with more people in the church so that I actually know what their physical needs are. And
Along with those lines, that made me think of the story of Jonathan and David.
yes,
Jonathan became such a good friend to David because he believed in him, and he knew God, and he knew the difference between his dad and David.
right,
And he knew him because he became his friend. And
Yep.
he put his own life on the line protecting him many, many times. So
right. So
that's kind of what you're saying. We've got to know the person well enough to know what their problem is, even when they don't say it.
right. Yep. So there we go. Now, obviously, sometimes. What's that?
So I was just gonna say,
Oh,
so
Bob, go ahead.
our neighbors that came over to help actually fell about 150-foot Doug fir, took it over to their place where they had somebody with a portable sawmill.
Yeah.
And Eric, we need to get one. And they milled out the beams for the uprights and then brought them back over and
Nice.
then helped us fit them up. So, but that's just because they were looking around to help, and I think
Yeah.
we all need to be looking around to help.
Right. And that's the point of the passage today. To bear one another's burdens, so we need to do that. Now, I did want to say, sometimes when there's an obvious need, you can kind of jump over level that doing good level of just being with people and doing things that are fun and good, and go right to the need, like we did with the favors. Like I think the first time that I spent any time with Bob, it was in the middle of the night and it was raining and we were moving his stuff. So it's okay to start with that if you know that. If you know what that need is, you can jump right in there. But a lot of times those needs are not going to be obvious until you spend more time with people and get to know them a little better. And so now we need to move on a little bit to the next one. The next one is the emotional burdens. So let me just ask you this. Have you ever had any emotional burdens? Anything that's weighing down your spirit? Anybody else out there ever experienced that? One other person. And the rest of you never have any emotional burdens. Wow, that's awesome. Except I don't believe it. I just think you're too shy to admit it. But that's okay. So let's think of a biblical example of how, or an example where someone helped to bear someone else's burden in a emotional sense. And then we'll maybe talk about some practical examples today. So anybody have a biblical example?
How about Paul?
Paul?
Are you?
Say more.
Yeah, something just happened to my screen. Anyway, regardless of that, about Paul when he was shipwrecked. What did he do before they got shipwrecked? They were in the storm, and he prayed for them because they were throwing everything overboard. They weren't eating. And he told them to eat.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So he shared encouragement with them. Said, "Hey, we've all been afraid of dying, but I've received word from the Lord. We're not going to die. It's time to eat something and get our strength up." Okay, that's a good one. I thought of one that was both a good example and a bad example at the same time. And that was Job and his friends. Isn't that a good example and a bad example? Like, his friends, they showed up and they sat with him when he was grieving the loss of his children, and he was pretty much speechless, and so they just came and sat with him, no doubt cried with him. That was great. Then they opened their mouth and started saying stupid stuff. Well, that's not so great. So maybe we need to be careful that we don't emulate the wrong part of that example. But anybody want to say something about the sort of emotional component of how we could bear one another's burdens today? I know it's something we don't normally talk about in church, but that's why we need to talk about it in church. So anybody have a thought there? What's something that you want to share about yourself personally, or just a thought about maybe how this could be done in a good way? Anyone? Hap has his hand up there. All right, go ahead, Hap.
You know that we can always pray for them. It's not hard for us to do. It's sometimes not hard for us to distinguish that there's a problem. Sometimes we don't know what it is, but by the calmness on their face, we know that they just need prayer. And so we can do that, and then later we see their countenances change and say, I've been praying for you, and I do see a change.
I think that's a fabulous idea. I would just sharpen it a little bit to say, not just praying for someone, but praying with someone. So if you see that someone's struggling with something, even if you don't know what it is, you can say, hey, I just have a sense that you have some kind of burden in your life right now. If you want to share that with me, I'm willing to listen. Even if you don't want to share it, can I still just encourage you and pray for you that the Lord will help you with this? And say, actually, instead of just saying, oh, I'll pray for you, actually pray for them. Like right at that time. Whether it's at church, or whether it's during the week somewhere, or in the office, or in the garden, or wherever you happen to be. If there's someone that needs prayer, like actually stop and pray with them at that time and lift them up before the throne of grace in their presence, so they know that is happening. And there's a extra benefit to that, rather than only saying, hey, I'll pray for you, and then check in later. Did I see another hand going up somewhere? Yeah, speak up so I can hear.
Can you see in the chat?
Oh, Hap again?
Oh, Catherine.
Oh, Catherine?
Yeah. The other thing that I had happen to me when I was struggling at one time was somebody shared a book on the topic that could lead me out of it, and that was very appropriate.
Okay. Catherine, go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Catherine, did you?
I want to tell you about being too late.
Okay.
I want to tell you a little story about being too late.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I have a friend who lives in Oklahoma, and I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks, and it's getting to be almost summertime. So I called her, and we talked for a while, and then I realized that something was wrong with her, but she wasn't telling me. So I just kept on talking till I had no voice left, and we finally got it out for each other. She laid it on the table that she had cancer and she was dying. Well, even her husband didn't know it. So
Wow.
we talked about it. I said, well, what are you doing right now? She said, we're getting up the motorhome and we're coming to California. I said, okay. She says, I burnt all my furniture in my house because we run out of wood. And I told her, I said, why didn't you call me and tell me? Oh, I call and tell you all the time, and you're always busy doing something for me. And I just couldn't do it no more. And I felt real bad because I felt healthy, energized, ready to, jump in the pathway and stopped the truck.
Yeah.
But, I felt real bad for her, so we talked about it. Finally got it all out of her. And
Yeah.
5 days later, she died.
Wow.
So don't be too late.
Yeah.
When you feel you have somebody who has a burden, and you like them and they're your friend, don't be late.
Don't
Make
wait.
sure you know
Yeah.
what they need and help. Because if you wait too long, it may be no more.
Right. So I'm just going to make a few suggestions on this. This is not comprehensive, and we're not going to take time to go into depth on this. This is a whole area of, like, we could do a 5-year dissertation on this and still not get it all. But you've heard the expression of someone needing to get something off of their chest. What is it they're needing to get off their chest? It's an emotional burden of some kind. And how does someone get something off from their chest? They get it off of their chest by sharing it with you. And then when they share that with you, you're helping them to bear that burden. So if someone has being available to listen. Oh, thank you. Someone discovered how to use the chat function. Yes. So you guys can add comments in the little chat bar there if you see it. In case you don't know where that is, if you look on the bottom of the screen, there'll be a little icon that says chat. You can click on that and it will pull up a little sidebar thingy and you can put in your comments in the chat. So yes, being available to listen in and of itself is a way of bearing burdens. Even if you have no clue what to do with whatever it is that someone's sharing with you, just the fact that you're willing to sit with them and listen and say, wow, that's pretty heavy stuff. I don't know what to do with that, but I'll pray with you, and I know God has a plan somehow. We'll figure out how to get through this. All of us could do that. So just the fact of allowing someone to get something off of their chest and share it with someone that they know that cares about them, that is, in fact, bearing one another's burdens. And that may be one of the most important ways in which we can bear one another's burdens. We read the passage in Galatians. It says, bear one another's burdens. I don't know of any heavier burdens than those. Emotional burdens, whether it's loss, grief, it could be relationship challenges that people are struggling with, problems within the family. There's lots of stuff there. There's lots of stuff. And